So this is the next morning. As I said before, I was going to let everything sit overnight so that I could cut up the roast beef. So with all the one ingredient foods that you've been cooking, now you can do the meal prep. So I'm going to cut up the roast beef that had been cooking in the slow cooker over, I think it was 7 hours total that I cooked it. I'm going to cut off the fat. I don't particularly like eating the fat, but some people in the family do. So I just cut that part off around the edges. And once that's gone, now I didn't season that side. I'd only, originally I cooked it half the time with the fat up so that the moisture's going in. I flipped it over and then I put some of this spices on top. It's ground onions, garlic, pepper, salt. So I'm going to cut it into slices, and this is way easier to cut when it's cool. Now you can have it the day of cooking it. Lots of times I'll do that, but it will just flake apart and then it doesn't look as presentable. This is a lot easier to cut. I had sharpened my knife yesterday. Before I was doing all the cutting, I probably could do it again because this is a little bit hard to cut through. This meat wasn't as fatty as some meats, so it is a little more dense to cut through. The fat was on the outside, it's not very marbled. Marbling is the term they use. Anyways, I'll finish cutting all of this meat. It's way easier to cut it all at once, make a mess, and then put it in the containers. I don't have enough containers for all of this food, but I'm just doing it to be an example for you of how you can portion out all of the food that you've been cooking and to make it have variety. So that's an example of the meat there. So the best thing to do is just to lay out all of the dishes, and I've got odds and ends here of plastic containers and glass containers, and I'm literally just going to mix and match and make them not all exactly the same, because that can be, for me, it can be boring. Now last night we ended up eating almost all of the potatoes with the cheese on top because it was so delicious. So I'm going to use the boiled potatoes, and I'm literally just going to put them into some of the sections. Now, because I'm not using rice or pasta, which I used to eat a lot more in the past, then the potatoes is the starch, and I find it makes me not miss the pasta and rice as much. I have had rice off and on since I lost the weight, but when I was losing weight, I rarely ate pasta or rice. So that's an example. I'm going to go ahead and do all of these. This is the cheese sauce. It got really, really stiff, which I was afraid it would, so it's not going to be as easy to put into the containers. So I'm just filling up the containers here. The next thing I'm going to do is the chicken. I'm going to put a little bit of chicken on some of these, and I'm going to use up the rest of these potatoes too, just so I have space. This is a portion that I will eat for a meal, and I have 2 of these in a day. And when I was losing weight, I ate 2 meals, 1 meal or 2 meals a day. Now, if you have high metabolism or are quite athletic, you might need 3 of these. So 3 meals spaced apart with no snacks, because you just won't get enough vitamins, minerals, nutrients, protein, all of that. I do not follow what many people say, where you're supposed to have, 200 grams of protein. And that is also for someone who's exercising a lot. I did learn a lot about all of the micronutrients and macronutrients, but I realized that there's so much out there and a lot of it conflicts. And so I basically figured out a way to make it so that I'm not having to count things all the time. And having all of this different variety, having the 20 types of vegetables throughout the week, plus some fruits, makes it so that I'm not feeling deprived, which makes me not eat the junk food, which overall is the ultimate goal, is to somehow get through life with all the temptations around us and to eat healthy. That's my take on that. I'm not claiming to be an expert on this, and there's so many experts that have conflicting advice, which means who's the expert? Now, I know there's scientific studies to say this amount of protein is good and that amount of protein is good, but then there's another scientist that comes along and says the opposite. This is what I'm doing with the eggs. I have this handy dandy little cutter, and I'm cutting up, like for this particular meal, there'll be more eggs. And I'll put some eggs in this one. Now this isn't just for me, this is for other people in the family, that they can pick one of these trays and say, that's the one I want to eat. Got to have a fridge in order to eat this way. It's really, really difficult if you don't have a fridge to eat. You got to eat out. You got to buy the salads. You've got to buy the foods that are in someone else's fridge. So I'm just continuing to cut up these eggs. These turned out perfectly. This was 14 minutes. There's no gray. If there's gray around the edges, then they're overcooked. So they usually say 13 minutes, but I found 14 minutes works perfect. There's no gray and they're cooked all the way through. So everything has potatoes. I'm going to add some meat to some of these. 2 pieces of meat, or 1.5 pieces of meat. That's got 2 types of protein. It's part of it is the types of foods, and part of it is making it not boring. So this has 3 types. So I got a little bit of chicken and the sausage and the beef, and not boring, and some variety. And this really is how I've been eating for almost 3 years, and it really makes the diet work. It makes it not feel like a diet because I'm not having to count. I'm looking at what I feel like eating in that day. This is the onions. This is the spinach. I'm going to put a little bit of onions on these potatoes because that will taste good. This is the stir-fry cabbage, which goes a little funny color because there was purple in the original stir-fry. Some of the Brussels sprouts over here. So as you can see, I'm just mixing and matching. And then at the end, I'm not going to finish these, but you can just get the idea of what it's going to be like. I can add some peas to some of these. And then this is this delicious tasting cheese sauce, which was made from the roux, which is the butter and the flour mixed together. And then I added the cream, the bone broth in there. I was trying to make it a little thinner. It's a bit thick. This just tastes good on everything. So this is going to be on the potatoes and the Brussels sprouts. And so when you heat this up in the microwave, you could have it in the container, put it on a plate, and then spoon this over top, because otherwise it's going to make a mess if you put it in here and then put it to the plate. But actually the plastic containers I don't heat in the microwave. I would take these out, but this is just an example. The glass containers I can heat in the microwave. What happens with plastic, I find, is that any food starts to color it, and I don't know if it's actually super healthy to have plastic. Some plastic is okay for microwave. So as you can see, some of these are complete. Some of these I could fill up a lot more. And then of course we've got the gravy over here, which got quite thick. So I'm adding a little bit of that on top of these. Oh, this just tastes so good. I can't wait to eat these. I think the reason I like this is that there's so much variety. I've seen a lot of people post meal prep and there's 3 or 4 things. This is 20, almost 20 varieties of vegetables and meat combined. And so it doesn't feel boring. And so when you're eating just this kind of food and you don't have that variety like we used to have when we would eat breakfasts, that, you get your pancakes and then you have your sandwiches and then you have your pasta. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner were very different. It was a lot of variety and you didn't feel bored. When you're eating main meals for your meals because you've weaned off of so much baked foods and so many grains, then it can feel boring. And that's why I've tried to find a way to make it not boring. And having the variety, mixing and matching, and realizing my lunch and my supper are the 2 main meals that I'm eating, and they don't look alike. So I don't feel like, oh, it's the same meal. Because if you have lunch and supper, and then the next day lunch and supper, and the next day lunch and supper, and you've bulk cooked and it all looks the same, that's 6 meals in a row, 3 days in a row that is all the same. I would get bored. And that's because I grew up and for 50 years was eating those very specific foods that separated out the different meals in the day. So that's why it seemed more boring to just have the main meals. And this was my hack, was to have variety. And like I said before, it makes me feel good. I look forward to the meals. I know that my body feels better. Almost all of my health issues have been resolved since eating this way, including losing the weight. So I'm going to continue doing it. It doesn't take math. I don't have to count anything. I'm not counting calories. I'm not counting carbs anymore because there's almost no carbs in this food. These aren't the foods that I have to worry about for carbs. There's a lot of fiber from all the vegetables, and it's fun to eat. It tastes delicious. I have no cravings anymore for sugar when I eat this kind of food. I do not crave sugar. Now, I will almost always have at least one of the meals have fruit at the end of my meal. And that's going to be usually frozen blueberries or frozen berries with a little bit of whipped cream on top. And the whipped cream is just plain whipped cream, no sugar or anything added to it, which I mix in a mixer. It's a simple way to eat. And as you saw with the other video, that it took 3 hours, over 3 hours to video that cooking day, I don't hardly have to do anything for 3, 4, 5 days. The kitchen can stay clean. Like I literally come in, put it on my plate, heat it up for 2 minutes and done. So it's such a simple way to eat, I find, and I don't have to think about it very much. So I recommend trying this. Thanks for watching.